Malaysia looks cheap online. You see the luxury condos, the rooftop infinity pools, the $2 meals, the TikTok saying, "Bro, you can live like a king here." And technically they're not lying. But what most people don't realize is that Malaysia's entire cheap lifestyle has been held together by one thing: government subsidies, cheap fuel, cheap electricity, cheap food transport, cheap logistics. And now, that system is starting to crack. This week, Malaysian politician Yeo Bin warned that planned fuel subsidy cuts could trigger inflation across the entire economy. And if that happens, Malaysia may stop being the Southeast Asian cheat code foreigners have been flexing online for years. Because behind the viral "Malaysia is affordable" videos, there's another reality nobody talks about. A reality where many locals are surviving month to month, where salaries barely match living costs, and where one policy change can suddenly make everything more expensive overnight. And honestly, that's what makes Malaysia fascinating. Because Malaysia isn't poor. It isn't rich either. It's stuck in this strange middle ground where life can feel incredibly cheap until you try living there long term. The crazy part is this. For foreigners earning dollars, pounds, or euros, Malaysia can feel ridiculously affordable. But for locals earning in ringgit, it's a completely different experience. The average monthly salary in Malaysia sits around the same level as the average cost of living for a single person. Think about that for a second. Imagine working full-time and most of your income disappears into basic survival. Rent, transport, food, bills. That's the hidden side of the "Malaysia is cheap" narrative. Because affordability depends on one very important question. Cheap for who? See, tourists experience Malaysia differently. You arrive with stronger currency. You stay in areas designed for foreigners. You eat out often. You convert prices mentally and think, "Wow, this is so affordable." And compared to cities like London, Toronto, or Sydney, it absolutely is. But once you move there permanently, the illusion starts changing. Because suddenly you begin seeing the hidden costs. International schools can cost more than some university degrees. One child alone can cost families over $20,000 a year in school fees. Now imagine having 2 kids. Suddenly that cheap country starts punching your wallet like a heavyweight boxer. Healthcare is affordable until you want premium private treatment. Condos are cheap until you want to live near the city center. Cars are expensive. Imported goods are expensive. And salaries? Those usually stay low. Malaysia's economy has this strange dual personality. To outsiders, it feels affordable. To many locals, it feels increasingly tight. And that tension is becoming harder to ignore. Especially now. Because fuel subsidies are one of the biggest reasons Malaysia has stayed relatively affordable for so long. For years, Malaysians enjoyed some of the cheapest petrol prices on earth. At one point, fuel prices were among the 10 cheapest globally. That's massive, because fuel affects everything: food delivery, transportation, logistics, taxi prices, imports, electricity costs, business operations. Cheap fuel quietly keeps an economy calm. But subsidies are expensive for governments. Very expensive. And Malaysia has been trying to reduce that burden. The problem? Every time subsidies shrink, prices rise somewhere else. We already saw this happen after diesel subsidy reforms. Transport costs jumped sharply. And once transport becomes more expensive, everything connected to transport follows. Groceries, online shopping, restaurant prices, construction materials. Inflation spreads quietly, like water leaking through cracks. That's why this debate matters so much. Because Malaysia's affordability isn't just happening naturally. It's being engineered. because for years it managed to balance modern living with relatively affordable prices. Now that balance is getting harder to maintain, and people can feel it, especially younger Malaysians. A lot of young adults today are asking the same questions young people everywhere are asking. Can I afford a home? Can I raise children comfortably? Will my salary keep up with reality? Am I actually progressing or just surviving more expensively? And when those questions start spreading across an entire generation, governments start paying attention. That's why subsidy debates become emotional. Because they're not just about fuel. They're about survival anxiety. They're about whether ordinary people can still maintain stability in modern cities. And honestly, that's the deeper story here. Malaysia isn't fake cheap. It's subsidized cheap. There's a difference. One is naturally low cost. The other requires constant government support to maintain. And maintaining that support becomes harder when economies slow down, oil prices shift, or government spending increases. Which brings us back to the big question. What happens if Malaysia slowly becomes more expensive over the next few years? Does it lose its appeal? For tourists? Probably not immediately. Malaysia still offers tremendous value compared to many countries. But for locals? The pressure becomes more personal. Because locals don't convert prices into dollars. They live entirely inside the ringgit economy. And that changes everything. At the same time, Malaysia still has enormous advantages. Strategic location, strong infrastructure, tourism, manufacturing, technology investment, cultural diversity, food culture. There's a reason so many foreigners genuinely love living there. And despite all the economic tension, Malaysia still remains one of Southeast Asia's most livable countries for many people. That's what makes this story so complicated. Malaysia isn't falling apart. It's evolving. The cheap paradise image is colliding with economic reality. And honestly, that collision was probably inevitable. Because no country can freeze living costs forever. Eventually, the real price of modern life catches up. The question is how painful that transition becomes. And right now, Malaysia may be entering that exact phase. The phase where a country stops being seen as shockingly cheap and starts becoming simply reasonably affordable, which sounds small, but economically, that changes everything. Because once affordability becomes fragile, people behave differently. Families spend less. Businesses become cautious. Young people delay major life decisions. Foreigners reconsider budgets. Investors become more careful. And slowly, the psychology of an entire economy shifts. That's why this moment matters more than most people realize. Not because Malaysia is doomed, but because it's reaching a turning point. A turning point between the old Malaysia people romanticized online and the new Malaysia being shaped by real economic pressure. And depending on how the government handles inflation, subsidies, wages, and growth, the next few years could completely redefine how the world sees the country. Maybe Malaysia remains Southeast Asia's smartest affordability hack. Or maybe the era of luxury life for cheap slowly starts disappearing. Either way, the version of Malaysia the internet sold to millions of people is starting to change. And most people haven't noticed it yet. Expenses. People always think they'll sort insurance out later. Later becomes next month. Next month becomes next year. And eventually later arrives. Malaysia has excellent healthcare. But excellent healthcare and affordable healthcare are not always the same thing. Then comes immigration. And this is where long-term dreams start becoming complicated. Visiting a country is one thing. Building a life there is something completely different. Short stays feel easy. Long-term reality introduces paperwork, renewals, requirements, and restrictions. The hidden administrative costs begin stacking up. Money, time, stress. Suddenly people find themselves spending energy just maintaining the right to stay where they are. That's not cheap living. That's stress dressed up as adventure. Then there are the things nobody warns you about. Lifestyle adjustments, social expectations, daily realities. Not because they're bad. Not because there's anything wrong with them. Simply because people didn't research them deeply enough. Because sometimes the biggest cost isn't financial. Sometimes it's adaptation. And that's where the contradiction finally appears. Malaysia wants investment. Malaysia wants talent. Malaysia wants growth. And it has built incredible infrastructure around that goal. Modern transport systems, massive developments, world-class buildings, real investment, real ambition. But building a city people want to visit is not the same as building a system people can easily settle into. Malaysia feels cheap when you arrive. It can feel cheap for months. Then life starts happening. Renewals happen. Unexpected expenses happen. Reality happens. And suddenly the spreadsheet starts looking very different. Here's the thing though. Malaysia really is remarkable. The food is incredible. The infrastructure is impressive. The mix of cultures creates something unique. It can genuinely be an amazing place to build a life. But special is not the same as cheap. And affordable is not the same as simple. Two people can move to the same city and experience completely different realities. One person does the research, understands the costs, plans carefully, builds community, and creates an incredible life. Another sees only the surface numbers, moves too quickly, and slowly discovers problems they never expected. Both stories are real. Both stories are happening right now. Sometimes in the same apartment building. So the question isn't whether Malaysia is worth it. The question is whether you've done enough homework to end up in the right version of the story. Have you been to Malaysia? Have you lived there? Did reality match expectations? Or did the real bill hit you somewhere you didn't expect? Drop your experience in the comments. People need real stories, not just highlight reels. And if this helped you, share it with someone planning a move. You might save them from a spreadsheet missing a few very important columns. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.